Guard 4 years earlier. The new leader of the Green Party has warned the government, "We're here to replace you." The London Assembly member Zach Polanski won in a landslide victory and wants to shift the party to the left. And long-running strikes by bin workers in Birmingham could continue past Christmas and into spring. Unite's members have overwhelmingly voted to extend their industrial action mandate until March. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 79 points at 91.16. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.14. LBC weather turning drier tonight with a few isolated showers for a time. Heavy rain moving across southern and central areas later, a low of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. I want to talk a bit about money. Your bills, your mortgage, your welfare payments, your borrowing and your taxes. Because all this autumn, the state of the British economy, and I say again, it's your money, is going to be a hot and traumatic subject for the government ahead of the budget. Today, the cost of borrowing rose to the highest it's been this century, and the pound plummeted. It's all to do with persistent inflation and a huge hole in the government finances. That will have to be filled by spending cuts or higher taxes. And the international markets, observing our low growth, don't have much confidence in Britain right now. Now, you might remember we had a Downing Street reshuffle yesterday. People you have never heard of doing jobs nobody understands. But tonight, I have a theory about that I'd like to share with you. The key guy is Darren Jones, the former number 2 in the Treasury in charge of public spending. He has been given a completely new job with a very grand title, Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister. I'm just beginning to wonder whether Keir Starmer hasn't decided that one way or another, alongside any possible tax rises, he is going to have to come down hard on public spending. If so, Jones is his boy. He knows the numbers, knows where the bodies are buried, and he's got an aggressive reputation. And that title, Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, gives him a new and special authority. Interesting. Unleashing Darren Jones would reassure the markets, and it would please the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, his old boss. If that brought down the cost of borrowing, it might make your life a bit easier at home. Is that what's going on? Should it be what's going on? If it isn't, that must mean higher taxes coming in November. Another new appointment is for the Prime Minister's economic advisor. That's Baroness Minouche Shafik, the one-time Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. So what might she be saying to Keir Starmer? Well, for once, we don't have to simply guess, because she joined me earlier in the year when I asked her, to start with, about that controversial rise in national insurance for employers.
I guess I wouldn't have chosen that tax if I had to raise revenue. I think there are other taxes that are better, like value-added tax or income tax, or even a land tax would be really desirable. They're less distortionary, they're more pro-growth. I also think that we need to look at some other things like, the way the labour market works. There's an employment bill that's currently working its way through Parliament, which reduces flexibility for employers. And I think there are several things, including some things in the manifesto, that merit revisiting, given the world is fundamentally different than when those words were written. And those things include looking at the fiscal rules again. It includes things like looking again at our trading relationships with Europe, and a number of other pieces of legislation that are in the manifesto as well.
In retrospect, absolutely fascinating words, I thought. Anyway, I'm joined first tonight by a genuine long-term insider, Lord Terry Burns, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Treasury, and then, for many years, Head of the Treasury. Terry, welcome into the studio. Let me put to you, first of all, my theory that perhaps Darren Jones is in there to get a grip of spending in a way that hasn't happened before.
Well, I think his main job probably is to make sure that he is there as a very useful bridge between the Prime Minister's thinking and the Treasury. Prime Ministers never like to be taken by surprise. They like to know what's going on, or they like to know that people who sit around them know what is going on. And on this occasion, There's been a lot of emphasis upon public expenditure. The government had a number of U-turns that they've had to make.
Embarrassments in the Commons.
Embarrassments in that. And I think it is important, and the Prime Minister probably feels it's important, that if he's going to have to keep downward pressure upon public expenditure, which I hope is the case, then he should be probably warned in advance about what the things that are under discussion in the Treasury are, where the pitfalls might be, what are the different ways in which they might tackle them.
So in a sense, obviously Darren Jones would be sitting beside him saying, this is what's going on, Prime Minister, but he'd also be ranging around Whitehall saying, we could save a bit of money here, we could save a bit of money there, but the consequences would be this or that. Well,
it would have to be very careful not to tread too heavily on the feet of his successor in the Treasury, who was the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, because that is essentially the job that he was doing in the Treasury. So I'm not quite sure how it's going to work if two people try to play that role.
What's your overall thought at the moment about the balance of bearing down on public spending versus the possibilities of raising taxes? Manoush Shafiq there was talking about looking again at income tax and VAT, for instance.
Well, I agreed very much with much of what Manoush has just said, or the recording that you played of her. When one is in this position where fiscal action is needed, and I think it is the case that it is wise probably to do two things. One is that you need a package of measures. You can't just bring out individual measures in isolation. You need things which hang together and which pull together and which it can be seen that different people are benefiting from some things and others are having to pay for things.
And it can be politically explained as well.
And it must be possible to, you've got to first of all explain what the problem is, of which the real problem is that we are not raising sufficient taxes in order to fund the public expenditure services that people would like to see. I think it is, in all of the main situations that I was involved in where we had anything like this, it was important to take action on both the spending side and on the tax side.
If you are still sitting inside the machine right now, how worried would you be about what's happened to borrowing costs today?
Well, I don't think it should be a trigger for great alarm. I mean, this has been on the cards in a way for some time. We're not the only country who is in this position.
France are in trouble too.
France are in trouble. Europe as a whole is suffering from slow growth, and that is why we're not generating the tax revenue that is needed to fund the expenditure. Our inflation rate has been a bit stickier than other countries, but that, frankly, is not unusual in the
British experience.
In the British experience. And, of course, we all have now these very high debt ratios, which have come about because we've had three major events which have caused governments to spend very heavily, and there hasn't been an opportunity yet to correct that. We had the financial crisis, we had COVID, we've had the energy crisis, and the important thing is to get a grip and for people to see that there is a plan. What I think is not helpful is to have these persistent stories that go on about what might be done and what might not be done.
This property tax, that property tax.
I think this is very unhelpful, and I think it is most unhelpful too if one starts to, on spending issues, one makes proposals that you can't carry through. So the next time there are serious spending proposals, they have to make sure that they have been well thought through. They can win them
in the House of Commons.
They're well-founded. They can win them in the House of Commons. People are prepared, and they can see why it is that they're necessary.
A final word maybe about the Chancellor's own position, because she's going to have a very, very hard autumn. We all know that. I mean, there's a big hole in the numbers. She has ruled out most of the obvious tax rises. Borrowing costs, as we just said, are going up and up and up. It's very hard to see. How dangerous is it for her?
Well, she must be feeling quite uncomfortable at this point. I hope that she's regretting some of the promises that she made in the past about taxation. And I hope that she will continue to believe that some of this problem has got to be tackled on the public expenditure side and not all of it to be tried to be resolved in terms of putting up taxes. Because, again, as we heard from Manoush, the last episode of putting up the taxes that were put up were not helpful from the point of view of promoting growth or for maintaining employment. And, these things need also doing in the round. I mentioned earlier the importance of packages. You don't want any of these individual measures to get out and be treated on their own, because a secret that I saw of the very good chancellors that I worked with in the 80s and 90s were they had this ability to put together packages that they could sell with a very clear reason as to why they had to be done.
Coherence, coherence, always coherence.
Indeed.
Lord Burns, thank you very much indeed for that. Now let me turn to the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mel Stride, who's been listening to that, and indeed to Manoush Shafiq. What did you make of it, Mel?
Well, I think they're in a big bind, and the big elephant in the room is how big is this fiscal black hole? Now, if it's relatively modest, which would still be significant, I think you could be looking at some tax increases and some cuts that might be of things like extending the freeze to the income tax threshold, for example. But if it gets into the kind of territory where people like the National Institute for Economic and Social Research are suggesting a black hole of perhaps 40 billion, then I think we're getting to where Terry was leaning into a bit, and Manoush was, which are the other taxes, the broader based taxes, income tax, VAT. Now, of course, that would be a direct, clear breach of Labour's manifesto commitment. And I think getting to your final question there about the future of the Chancellor, I think that would put her in a very difficult position if she was having to go there.
Because you could argue, contrary-wise, that, the world has changed, things have deteriorated very fast, and that therefore promises made back last summer, I know it's not very long ago, but back last summer, might now be unwise to commit yourself to.
Well, as Manoush herself said in your clip, she recognised that, for example, £25 billion worth of national insurance increases for businesses is going to dampen growth, talking the economy down, which is what the government did with this fictitious £22 billion black hole, was much of the same. And those changes have both slowed growth and, of course, stoked inflation, which has been part of the story as to why interest rates have been higher for longer, and therefore our debt servicing costs that are now running at about 100 billion a year, twice what we spend on defence, are running so high. So it is, I think, the choices this government has made, and the IMF and others have echoed that in their commentaries, that have actually driven most of the problem. It's the fiscal situation, the inflation situation, and of course there are the global headwinds which all economies are suffering. But I think a large component of it can be laid at the Chancellor's door, I'm afraid.
So if we've got the two sides, by and large, the tax-raising side, and we've talked about, interesting that VAT and income tax were put back on the table in that clip, I thought, but also the public spending side. Now, they've been in real trouble trying to cut the welfare bill. If you were them, where would you be looking to make savings?
Well, welfare is a clear area. And in fact, what they did when they first came into office was to take out of the OBR scorecard £5 billion worth of savings that we had introduced through welfare reforms to the work capability assessment. They then tried to introduce their savings, which are of roughly the same order, and of course couldn't get them through their backbenchers. And I think that is part of the story with the markets, actually, is that the markets were looking at this government, asking the same questions that you're asking, and concluding that when it comes to getting spending under control, this government doesn't have the will and it doesn't have the plan to do it.
So I suppose the counterpunch to that would be, if Darren Jones is there to get spending under control and be, as it were, the Starmer enforcer across Whitehall, and if that works, two big ifs, I grant you, then perhaps things would stabilise and perhaps we might get out of this position of having quite such high borrowing costs.
Two ifs and a perhaps in that scenario. It's probably two ifs and a perhaps too many. Look, if history is any guide to the future, I wouldn't put my money on there being a very clear plan that suddenly materialises and it all gets very coordinated and they get their backbenchers in order and they suddenly drive through these changes and savings. I just can't see it happening. And my overarching observation of this shuffling of the deck chairs is that Terry is right. Good coordination between number 10 and the Treasury is absolutely essential. Why has it taken them over a year to get to this point? And we're all paying the price for that.
Chancellor's last budget?
Let's see.
All right. Mel Stride, Lord Burns, thank you both very, very much indeed. Up next, the Green Party leader was announced today, and Zach Polansky won by a veritable landslide. But who is he? And could he be another left-wing threat to the authority of the Prime Minister? You are listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:15.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why this staggering level of incompetence?
Straight to the point.
This is the economics of the madhouse from this government.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
But she does seem to struggle with her sums.
Listen on Global Player or the new LBC app. Download it now from your App Store. LBC.
apply.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:17. Britain has a new party leader. By an overwhelming majority, the Green Party has chosen Zach Polanski as its new leader. A former actor, a former hypnotherapist. He's gay, he's vegan, he's Jewish, and he's a long-time activist for the party. He's a bit of a believer in reinvention as well. He chose his own second name to honour his earlier family and his first one after a character in a children's book. Let's talk now to LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Chambray, who was at the Polanski leadership announcement earlier on today. And Aggie, I think the crucial thing, more important than everything I've just said just now, is that he's clearly a left-wing leader.
He's an extremely left-wing leader. Even in his speech, he was really making the point of that. And on a kind of policy platform, he's advocated for higher taxes on millionaires, on billionaires, a wealth tax. He talked in his speech about wanting renationalisation of water companies, more regulation for business. He talked about what is happening in Gaza, called that genocide. He talked about NATO, not today in his leadership speech, but he's previously talked about NATO and said, I think our NATO policy is out of date. The idea that we can reform NATO is an idea that's on its last legs.
Now, Aggie, there isn't a single syllable of what you've said that couldn't have been said just as firmly by Jeremy Corbyn or Zara Sultana. So got these two different parties, the Greens now under him and this new breakaway party, and they're fishing in the same pond, aren't they?
They're very, very much fishing in the same pond, very much nudging up against each other. And I think the question on everybody that was watching's lips was, what is that actually going to look like in practice? And Zach Polanski was asked about it in the Q&A afterwards, and he said, look, it's too early. It's too early. Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana is not even a party at this stage yet. We don't know what that is going to look like. But he said, isn't it interesting that people already are so angry with this Labour government that they are thinking about that? And then he was very complimentary about Jeremy Corbyn and said he's willing to work and talk with anyone who shares his values. And Jeremy Corbyn then put out a post on social media saying he was looking forward to working with the Green Party.
That's really, really interesting. So some kind of tacit alliance or arrangement between the two could be, because they're both, in some ways, they're taking on Keir Starmer, obviously, but they're also looking at Nigel Farage. They want to be, as it were, the left populist alternative to the right populism of the Reform Party and parties to the Reform's right as well.
And that's actually what Zach Polanski said. He's called himself an eco-populist and said he wants to, although he says he disagrees with everything Nigel Farage says and stands for, he says he wants to basically be the Nigel Farage on the left, learn ideas and ways of doing politics from him in terms of storytelling, in terms of social media.
Has he got the charisma to do that, do you think?
Well, it's really interesting that he's a former actor, isn't it? You can sort of see in the fact that he's described as a bold communicator. You can see his acting ability when he's standing up on stage delivering this performance. He's also kind of shed a tear as he was standing up there at the exact right moment. But it's interesting you talk about Reform UK and the Conservatives, because it felt like in the last general election, the Green Party were not just targeting Labour Party seats at all. And actually 3 out of the 4 seats they won were from Conservatives.
Because there are lots and lots of small C Conservatives or big C Conservatives who are also would regard themselves as passionate environmentalists. In other words, there is a blue-green alliance or area, and they have lost today. They have lost in that vote because, you know, the old Green Party had people from the right and the left and the centre, and that's died.
That's right. And actually, it was an incredibly fractious contest. And I think that was part of it. You know, the people who were running against Zach Polanski, that was Ellie Chowns and Adrian Ramsey. And
famously on Ian Dale's show on LBC, they weren't able to say they liked each other.
Well, no, Zach Polanski did say over and over again, I like Adrian Ramsey, I like Adrian Ramsey. But Adrian Ramsey simply would not say it back, which Zach Polanski said was very, very hurtful. But it's about that, that the way that the Green Party operated before, basically dying a death, and them feeling really uncomfortable with how left-wing Zach Polanski is. And they're worried about what that kind of political strategy is actually going to look like.
I mean, there's clearly a lot of people who share those kind of views in the country. I can't remember exactly, but I think something like 800,000 people signed up or showed interest in the Jeremy Corbyn party in the immediate aftermath. That's an awful lot of people. But at the same time, the more parties you divide that group of people amongst, the less likely it is for them to win seats, and the more in a sense, Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer in number 10 can relax.
Yes, and as I say, it seems less likely under the Zach Polanski leadership that they're going to be targeting those Conservative, indeed Reform UK seats, and much more likely, and listening to Zach Polanski today, it really sounded like much more likely they will be coming for Labour seats, and especially if they team up with your party, whatever your party ends up looking like, I think that will be concerning. He today talked about winning 30 seats. I mean, that could definitely be the difference, and especially bringing in the 16 and 17-year-olds who we imagine will do very, very well. The Green Party will do very, very well.
Well, this is so interesting, and I hope you can join me tomorrow, because I'm hoping that we can speak to Zach Polanski himself in the studio tomorrow. But for now, Aggie, thank you very much indeed for that. And now to another part of the world, because it has been a very big day in Beijing, with 20 leaders of basically anti-Western or neutral states and a vast Victory Day parade. The summit there includes Russia, China, North Korea and India. Some people think that India's Narendra Modi has been pushed into this alliance by ham-fisted Trump tariffs imposed upon it. And so is this the new geopolitical shape of the world, dominated by an alliance which is military but also economic and resolutely anti-Western? Let's talk now to David Lubin, the Senior Research Fellow in the Global Economy and Finance Programme at Chatham House. David, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Can I ask, first of all, about India in all of this? Because the notion that you've now got three big nuclear powers all shoulder to shoulder must worry people in Washington and in Europe.
Yeah, and it's entirely of Washington's making. If you take the tariffs on their own, the tariffs that Trump imposed on India as a way of, trying to convince India not to buy Russian oil, given the fact that China responded with such defiance to the tariffs that Trump put on China, it was always inconceivable that Modi could do anything other than respond with defiance himself. Otherwise, Indian voters would be pointing at him saying, why does China have a leader that kind of confronts Donald Trump and we don't? So the fact that, in a way, China established a kind of template for aspiring great powers to respond to Trump. But there's background to it, because the relationship between New Delhi and Washington had been deteriorating for some time, not just because of the tariffs, but also primarily because of Washington's kind of effort to sidle up to Pakistan. And so for all sorts of reasons, Trump, in effect, kind of delivered Modi to Xi Jinping as a neatly wrapped gift.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it does look, on the face of it, an awesome alliance. You see them all there, and you've got an awful lot of the world shoulder to shoulder. But if this is an American mistake or an American creation, that's one thing. Clearly, militarily, this is a very powerful group of countries. But what about the economics? Because Xi Jinping seems to be wanting it to be more of an economic alliance, helping each other, than it's been in the past.
Yes, I think it's first important to kind of correct the phrase you used of alliance. This is, what there is not a lot more than symbolism. I mean, there's certainly not an alliance there. And the Chinese government would certainly deny any intention to form an alliance. And I think the idea of India forming any kind of military cooperation with China is beyond.
Well, they're against each other, really, aren't they?
Beyond the pale, that's right. But the economics, so you've got this kind of symbolic win, very important symbolic win for Xi Jinping. And it's an important win for him because in order for China to present itself as a responsible alternative pillar of global order, the support of the global South is extremely important to China. But I would argue that China isn't quite making the most of the gift that Washington seems to be offering it, in the sense that there are lots of reasons for other developing countries to be a bit irritated with the economic policies that China is expressing.
Is that because China is striking very, very hard bargains?
Yes. I mean, in a way, I think there are a number of things. First of all, whereas China used to be a net lender to developing countries, it's now taking net repayments from developing countries. And also it's running an ever larger trade surplus with developing countries. I mean, just as Western economies are getting upset about having cheap Chinese goods dumped on their markets. There are plenty of developing countries, Brazil, Turkey, and many others, who feel the same way. So the trade relationship between China and other developing countries is far from what it could be. The simplest solution from China's point of view to improving its trade relationship with developing countries would be to deliver macroeconomic stimulus to the domestic economy, let the exchange rate strengthen, and basically allow China to import more from these countries.
But no sign of that yet. This might seem a very bizarre question because we've seen him shaking hands and smiling in absolutely the centre of things. But is Xi any longer really the absolute leader of China? Because there's been rumours, there's been people writing saying actually he's now a kind of front man, he's a symbol, and there are much more powerful figures behind him.
I don't think I can comment responsibly, Andrew. The Chinese politics takes place within the blackest of black boxes. And I think
okay, we're not going to go into that.
What the world knows about elite Chinese politics is precisely zero.
That's really interesting. We won't go into the black box. We'll say thank you very much indeed. Instead, David Lubin there from Chatham House. Thanks so much. Now, President Trump's going to be making an address to his nation in the next hour or so amid rampant speculation about his health. Is there anything to the rumours? We'll hear from Washington and from a man who worked with him in the first administration. But the time now, 6:28, and Amelia Cox has the news headlines.
The Shadow Chancellor has told LBC when it comes to savings, Labour doesn't have the will and doesn't have the plan. Mel Strider's been speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr as the cost of government borrowing has reached its highest level in almost 30 years. A man who shot dead a prison officer in a revenge killing in Lancashire has been jailed for at least 45 years. 35-year-old Elias Morgan killed Lenny Scott as he was leaving a gym in Skelmersdale in February last year. And the Green Party's new leader in England and Wales has warned the Labour government, "We are here to replace you." Zach Polansky won a landslide victory that will most likely see his party shift its politics to the left. LBC weather turning drier tonight with a few isolated showers for a time. Heavy rain moving across southern and central areas later, a low of 6 degrees.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The conversation being dominated by what we heard in the House of Commons yesterday from the Home Secretary, and pleasure to say we can now welcome her to the microphone. Yvette Cooper, Home Secretary, joins me now. We're bringing forward the idea of closing these so-called asylum hotels. When do you hope?
We will end the asylum hotels by the end of the Parliament. We obviously want to do that more swiftly. We do also want to see alternative sites, more appropriate sites, including looking at military and industrial sites as well.
Home Secretary, what's an industrial site?
There are a range of different things that we're looking at.
Well, can you give me an example, Home Secretary?
Not yet.
You've no idea of the example of what it might be. Let's look at industrial sites, Home Secretary. That's a good idea, and no one knows what it is.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player, and the LBC app. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:31. About a fortnight ahead of Donald Trump's planned state visit to Britain, And Washington is awash with speculation about the president's health. He's barely been seen in public for the last week, certainly not at close range. And that's led to hysterical, even deranged-sounding rumours in the US about whether he has in fact died or is suffering from a severe illness of some kind. Now, I think this is probably bonkers, not least because the White House says President Trump will be making a statement to the American people at around 7 p.m. our time. Now, we don't know what it's about. Trump's a master of using mystery to draw even more attention to himself. But if he's making this announcement, then he is, I think it's fair to conclude, very likely to be not dead. I'm joined in the studio by Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration. But I'm just going to start with an update about what we know or don't know this afternoon with LBC's Washington guy, Simon Marks. Washington guy, Simon Marks, what do you make of these rumours?
Well, I mean, they're complete nonsense and they are bonkers. I mean, we know that Donald Trump oddly disappeared from view after last Tuesday's cabinet meeting, which was a 3.25-hour event, very much Pyongyang on the Potomac, as the sycophants that make up his cabinet pledged fealty to him and each made an appearance and comments in tribute of his leadership. And then he did disappear from view until Friday, when he gave an hour-long interview to a pro-Trump publication here called The Daily Caller. And he was seen over the weekend at playing golf at a nearby golf club, but he was seen in the distance. The press pool didn't get very close to him, either when he departed the White House or when he arrived at the golf course. And that only stoked these rumours that something was up. And it may well be that something has been up. We knew last week, for example, that there were questions about bruising on the back of his right hand that the White House has not yet explained, and that at times during that cabinet meeting he appeared to be trying to cover up. So he's got a lot of questions to answer.
It is. Is there an element of sort of poetic justice here, however, because Donald Trump has famously used social media to whip up storms of conspiracy and anger and all the rest of it, and of course all the way through the latter part of the Biden administration there were questions, justified questions, as it turned out, entirely justified questions about Biden's health. So is this some kind of, as it were, spiritual payback going on?
Well, I think that there will be many people that view it in those terms, and there is no doubt also that pressure is mounting on the White House to have the White House physician explain what is taking place in terms of the president's health. We know that he's been diagnosed with venous insufficiency, the veins in his arms and legs not moving blood around at the normal rate. That is common among aging men, particularly in the United States. So I think they are facing questions about when a real White House physician's report will be published, as opposed to some of the less than complete descriptions of his health that have been proffered in the past. This announcement, by the way, is apparently all about the relocation of the Space Force Command. He's moving it away from Colorado, which just happens to be a state run by Democrats, and he's going to place it in Alabama, which just happens to be a state run by loyal pro-Trump Republicans.
Well, there you go. Simon Marks, thank you very, very much indeed for that. And now, as promised, let's hear from Ambassador John Bolton, Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor and former US Ambassador to the United Nations, who joins me in the studio. Very good to have you in the studio, Ambassador. Do you agree with Simon Marks that this is almost certainly complete hogwash, these health rumours?
I think it is. I think people like to speculate on the president's health. It's just, it goes with the territory. I don't see anything to it. I don't see any real change at all.
And when it comes to his visit to the UK, which we're now, it's only a couple of weeks away now, what do you think he might want out of it?
Well, I think he enjoyed his state visit with Queen Elizabeth beyond description. I remember when we went to the state banquet at Buckingham Palace, which was quite a treat for me, I must say. I think if Trump could have stayed all night, he would have. So he's going to enjoy this. And it was a wise move by Keir Starmer to play this invitation at their first meeting. And I think it's worked out well so far.
So obviously, Britain is always wanting some kind of amelioration on Trump tariffs in response. But I guess the two big difficult areas are going to be Gaza and are going to be Ukraine. So let's, if we may, talk about both of those. When it comes to Gaza, we see Israel pushing ahead more and more settlers into the West Bank. And we see no sign whatever that Prime Minister Netanyahu is really listening to Donald Trump.
Well, I think Trump is giving him leeway. I think Trump probably believes the two-state solution is dead. I myself think it's been dead for quite some time. I don't believe, despite press rumors, that Trump really is working away on making the Gaza Strip the Eastern Mediterranean's Riviera. But I think we're now into a serious discussion, or should be, about what to do with the Gazans. What's the most humanitarian thing to do for them? And I think, given that a two-state solution after October 7 is not going to happen, whatever you believed about it before, you have to look at repatriation, resettlement of the people of Gaza. I know that's an emotional issue, but that's what's happened to every other refugee population in the world since 1945.
We've had all these experts in genocide law now saying that what Israel's doing is genocide under the law. Does that make any difference in American politics? Will people change their minds in any way about that?
Well, I think some will, but I don't think the conditions for genocide have been met. I think this is a particularly bloody war caused largely by Hamas using innocent Gazan civilians as their shield from the beginning, having already taken billions of dollars previously intended for humanitarian supplies to build this unbelievable tunnel network under Gaza.
While all of this is going on, of course, today we've been watching these enormous parades in Beijing. Very, very impressive military parade, I have to say. And you've got Putin, and you've got Kim Jong-il, and you've got Modi and Xi all standing side by side. Do you think the shape of the world geopolitically is changing?
Well, I don't think it's changing because of this, but I do think it's part of China's effort to cast itself as a responsible alternative to the U.S., or at least to Donald Trump. Part of it is rewriting history about how the Second World War actually ended, and the U.S. and other allied countries' roles is sort of brushed out of it, as is the role of Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese nationalists. It turns out the Chinese Communist Party actually defeated Japan. That is a way of establishing legitimacy. It goes on to a lot of other things. This show of weaponry is intended to prove China is a major world player today, and the presence of Putin and Kim Jong-un reinforces it. Modi's presence is due, I think, about 100% to Donald Trump, and the way he's treated India on a number of fronts over the past several months, setting back decades of effort to prize India away from its Cold War relationship with Russia, and to make sure that Indians of all different political views understand the principal threat they face in the world is from China. That has been reversed. I think it can be reversed again, but it's a very bad moment for the West.
That's a massive, massive mistake. I mean, we were just watching pictures a little while ago of Putin and Modi literally backslapping and full of grins and so forth. The relationship seems as strong as it ever has been.
Yeah, I think Trump sees international relations through the prism of his personal relations with leaders. So if he has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin, the U.S. has a good relationship with Russia. That's obviously not the case. But Trump had a very good relationship personally with Modi. I think that's gone now. And it's a lesson to everybody, for example, Keir Starmer, that a good personal relationship may help at times, but it won't protect you from the worst.
One of the things that came out of today was Putin saying to Western Europe, don't worry at all. I've absolutely no interest in invading any of you. Stop worrying. It's all nonsense. You can rely on me.
Yeah. Well, the left out part was my first objective is to recreate the Russian Empire, which I'm busy doing in Ukraine. And as soon as I've attended to that task, then we'll deal with you.
Yeah, indeed. Because Ukraine is going to be the other big issue. Do you think that the scales have really fallen from Donald Trump's eyes about Putin?
No, I don't think so. I think Putin established a relationship with him in the first term, I think, personally, using his KGB training to assess people, to see their weaknesses and to exploit them. I think he did it again in Alaska. I think Trump is likely to lose interest. I think there's some small chance he'll impose sanctions on Russia, but he sees failure here. He said he could make this deal in 24 hours. That was obviously never going to happen, but it hasn't happened in the first 7 months of his presidency either. I think he just wants to leave it behind. Now, if we continue to help Ukraine with intelligence, if we continue to provide weapons, even if indirectly through Europeans, I'll be happy with that, but there's no guarantee about that.
No, Gary, I'm kind of haunted by something that the Russian ambassador, Andrew Marr, said to me right at the beginning of all of this, right at the beginning of the war, when Russia was suddenly doing very badly again. They were being pushed back from Kiev. And he said, no, we are going to win this. And I said, really? He said, yes, and I'll tell you why. He said, we will create a war economy, and we will think about war, and we will focus on this war. And you in the West, you'll lose interest. You'll get distracted. You'll forget about it. And it seems to me in many ways he's right.
Yeah, I think the authoritarians count on short attention spans in democratic societies. They have the luxury of not worrying about it. In Donald Trump, they have a leader with a particularly short attention span, and I think Putin has shown he knows how to exploit it.
Very, very interesting. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Up next, we're going to bring you a discussion with one of the most beloved modern English novelists, Sebastian Faulks. By the time now, 6:42.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Donald Trump is about to speak in Washington. We'll see what he has to say. Plus, can Labour turn the economy around?
Ian Dale on LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:44. Sebastian Faulks is one of the few serious English novelists who's broken through to a massive popular audience. Above all with his novel about the First World War, Birdsong, as well as Charlotte Gray and Engelby. Now he's written a kind of memoir, Fires Which Burned Brightly, about everything from running away at boarding school to his love of France and cricket and fine wine. But as I discovered when we talked, there are darker themes in this as well. We started, however, by discussing Birdsong, and I wanted to know why he was drawn to writing about that particular subject.
I think there were a few triggers. One was when I was about 12 at school, having to read out the names of all the old boys of my school who died in that war. And although it was only a small school, my throat was raw by the end of it, just by the sheer number of names. And then in about 1988, which was the 70th anniversary of the armistice, I went as a journalist on a trip to Flanders with some veterans who were still alive at that point. So I actually met one old man who'd been part of the standing army, the old contemptibles, the professional army, and then there were half a dozen who'd been part of Kitchener's army, the volunteers, who were raised so successfully in 1915. And we went back to an old battlefield, Neuve-Chapelle. And when I stood with them there, one of them holding onto my arm, as old men tend to do, somehow, in some way, the whole experience came out of history and became almost, that in the moment. And he was standing in the same place he'd stood, and I was standing where his friend had stood, and the German pillbox, the little concrete fortification at the other end of the field, was still there. And then I began to think and began to hope that maybe I could write about this. My strong belief was that the First World War had fallen out of public consciousness.
Which is weird to think now, but at the time it probably was.
Well, it hadn't vanished completely, of course, because there were universities and people writing.
But it wasn't so much talked about. It was Alan Clark's Lions Led by Donkeys. That's all I remember from that, previous period.
I think, your averagely sort of reasonably educated gathering people were quite ignorant about it. And it's largely to do with the way the Second World War had been memorialised, quite rightly, the Holocaust, and also all the rather good films that have come out about it. it had sort of blocked out the memory of the first. So I took a gamble that most people, this would be news to them. But I also felt that for those to whom it would not be news, I needed to tell them something they didn't know. And I came across this story of the tunnelers, these people who dug underneath no man's land, the Germans towards the Allies and vice versa, trying to undermine the opposition trench, but also fighting one another underground. And I thought, God, I didn't know anything about this. I just stumbled on this, really. And here is this sort of hell within a bigger inferno. And I thought this could be interesting.
There's an awful lot of drink in this book. A lot of alcohol gets discussed and consumed. And there's a really disturbing chapter which you call Sand in the Gears, which is about mental illness and mental health. And this is a period when you have been drinking quite heavily, or binge drinking as a young man. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to explain to people listening what happened to you. But you say in this book, across the world, regardless of climate, nutrition, ethnic variation and genetic drift, humanity is roughly 1% psychotic. And that is unlike any other kind of animal that we know of. So let's start by asking what happened to you.
Well, first of all, I was not psychotic. That's the most important thing to say. When I was about 20, I was at university, Cambridge, and I was quite unhappy. I was, finding it difficult to sort of move from post-adolescence into the adult world. I was very shy. I was confused, rather hothouse, overeducated, very bookish, not very worldly, and I sort of took refuge in drink and to some extent in drugs. Nothing very hard, but lots of marijuana and so on, stuff that was available easily. And I had what you would... There is no word to describe it. That's part of the problem with psychiatry. People can't agree on definitions. They can't.
They
agree
keep coming up with new words and new
words.
phrases. Yeah.
A sort of breakdown, I suppose, is such a useless expression, but because it's so vague, it's actually quite helpful in a way. And for about 2 years, I suffered difficulties of panic attacks and insomnia and agoraphobia and so on.
But you woke up one day, you got out of bed, you got dressed, and then you woke up again, and it went on and on and on.
Yes, it was a very frightening experience at the time. And eventually, about the fifth attempt, I found that I was finally awake and reality had been essentially re-established. But I felt that my grasp of reality had been very badly shaken. And for about 2 years, I really struggled to believe in the physical reality of the surrounding world. But it's important to stress, I think, that although the symptoms were very florid and very distressing, my underlying condition was not serious. And I don't for a second want to compare myself to people with serious psychiatric illness.
We are, roughly speaking, of an age. And I'm just wondering, as it were, from our generation, what your message would be to, as it were, the Gen Zers or the younger people at the moment. We often, older people, mock the sort of endless talking about my mental health and my mental this and my mental condition. What's your perspective? Do you think that younger people are talking and articulating something that we should have known more about when we were young?
Well, I think to some extent it's good. People talk about these stresses and strains and emotional upsets. But I think, and also I think that the time when when neurodevelopment becomes complete, which is in the early 20s for both young men and young women, it is quite a fragile time. And, people need to be very aware of this. And you need backup and support and pastoral care if you're at a college or university, whatever. But at the same time, that's good. The downside, I think, is that people are far too quick to apply labels. And it's not good if you're going through something which is essentially maybe difficult, but it is really quite natural and normal period of transition in your life to have some sort of pseudo-diagnoses or initials put onto your condition, because it pathologizes.
Don't cling on to the label too
and then
firmly.
it means I can't work now because I've got PT,
ADHD
or whatever it might be. I don't think that's helpful at all. And the whole idea, the essay in the book, Sand in the Gears, is about the whole history of psychiatry. It isn't really about me, but I use myself as an example. And in America particularly, they're moving to a place now where they won't really, they've given up all belief in categorization and nomenclature of disease at all. And their view is that we're all a bit bonkers. It's just a question of how far across the spectrum you are.
That strikes me as being very healthy. One final area, a vague question, but you do strike me as being quite a patriotic person. There's a lot of France in this book, but there's a lot of deep England and cricket and the war and all of the rest of it. And it seems to me at a time when a lot of people are talking about England and Englishness rather than Britishness.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in what you think about what's been going on over the summer and all the flags and stuff. Do you feel a warmth in your heart when you see a St George's Cross, or do you feel a little bit yuck?
I feel that a lovely emblem is being trashed by people with very doubtful motives. And, I think of St George's Day, Shakespeare's birthday, as sort of Norman Church and a flag fluttering as something which, when I was a child, was innocent and unsplendid. But I have absolutely no time at all for...
You think it's being used as a threat?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to publish this book now, Fires Which Burn Brightly, was because I felt that after COVID, the world had changed in a way and something had been lost and broken. And I think it's summed up in the phrase, people talk about my truth, as though truth were something selective. You can have my opinion, but truth isn't something that you can deal in. And a world of Trump and Putin and Netanyahu, AI, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, all these people are to some extent... something has been lost, I feel. But I don't want this book to be a sort of lament.
An elegy.
No, it's not, because there are lots of good things about the modern world. But I feel also that sometimes you have experiences which, because they're your own and it's your life, their great urge is to normalize things and say, this is the way it is, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And then I felt I'd reached a watershed when, looking back over my experiences, they were fine, but they were also weird. And they had become curios, they had become museum-like pieces. And if I could just explain things most interesting aspects of my life and leave out all the boring stuff, then younger people particularly, might look at them and say, wow, that was funny.
Well, Sebastian Faulks, Fires Which Burned Brightly, a thoroughly enjoyable museum. Thank you very much indeed. And finally tonight, a bittersweet story, for me at least. New AI-assisted software can apparently triple the rate of full recovery for stroke patients, and it's available through the NHS. It allows doctors much faster processing of brain scans, and since this treatment must above all be quick, this could radically improve the outlook for stroke patients. Since stroke is the fourth leading cause of death in Britain, around 38,000 deaths a year, this is clearly very good news. So why bittersweet? Only because when I had my stroke 15 years ago, AI wasn't available, and today I would have been in a much better condition if it had been rats. Let's talk now to Juliette Bouverie, CEO of the Stroke Association. Juliette, we read these newspaper stories and sometimes they're hype and sometimes they're not. Is this breakthrough as exciting as the newspapers are saying?
I can honestly say it really is a revolution in stroke services. So we started adopting AI to augment stroke brain imaging in 2019. In 4 years now, we've got all stroke units across the whole of England using AI support software. And as you quite rightly say, what it's doing is it's enabling brain scans to be more rapidly read, interpreted. That in turn leads to quicker treatment decisions. And there are fabulous treatments available for stroke: thrombolysis, which dissolves the clot; thrombectomy, which mechanically removes the clot. And if patients are getting rapid, quick access to those treatments, then it's saving lives and it's also improving recovery. And what the data tells us about the AI software is it's really speeding up the time to treatment. So what we know is it's reducing the time from hospital to treatment by up to 60 minutes. And for a proportion of patients, it's significantly improving their recovery. So it's just good news all round.
Excellent news. And just for people listening who might not understand, can we talk a little bit about the importance of very fast reporting of strokes and treatment? Because it's all about the amount of time that the brain is dying because there isn't enough blood or oxygen or whatever, versus solving it out. So the longer the gap between the stroke happening and the treatment, by far the worse the outcome. true?
That's absolutely right. I mean, stroke is always a medical emergency, and that's why we say to anyone who suspects that a loved one might be having a stroke to call 999, because it is absolutely critical. They get to hospital as quickly as possible. They get access to that quick brain scan, and then that in turn leads to the treatment. And we know that for every minute that a stroke goes untreated, there are 2 million brain cells in the brain that basically get lost. So we talk about time is brain. It really is important that diagnosis and treatment happens rapidly.
Well, I was overnight, so I don't think I've got any brain cells left at all by your calculation. Nonetheless, can we just finish by reminding people again what signs to look for? If you've got a loved one or a friend who's in front of you, what are you keeping an eye out for and thinking about stroke or a TIA?
Yeah, so the important thing for people to remember is the FAST acronym. So FAST stands for face, so you might see somebody's face drooping. Arms, so somebody's arms may be difficult to lift. Speech, their speech may be slurring. And then the T is time, so always call 999 because a suspected stroke is always a medical emergency.
Droopy face, droopy arm, and get them to hospital as soon as they can. Juliet, thank you very, very much indeed for that. Really interesting. As I say, I wish it had been around 15 years ago, but there you go. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. So, download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, Donald Trump will be speaking in a few moments, but about what, we know not. Let's hope he does. But first,
that interest rate has gone up and it's now at the highest level that it's been, going all the way back to 1998.
Just how damaging is this to the prospect of economic recovery? As Liz Truss found, if the markets lose confidence in a government's economic approach, this is what happens. So what do Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves do about it? How can they turn around the economy? At 8 on Cross Question, former Deputy Prime Minister Therese Coffey, Financial Times political editor George Parker, Labour MP Dame Emily Thornberry and the SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn. And at 9, the Green Party has a new leader. What would he have to do to make you consider voting Green?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.